Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
May the love of God and the peace of Jesus be with us. I am so thankful to be here tonight. So I just want to say that I'm really grateful for the invitation, and I'm thankful to all of you for being here with me. The launching of this new book this year for me was really exciting. It's very special because, as the title of the book alludes to, what Spiritism represents, what it offers, can and does touch hearts and minds in ways that are really life-changing. And the vision that we find in Spiritism, it brings together the once scattered puzzle pieces of life into a single picture that consoles aching hearts and satisfies our increasingly pressing desire for logic and reason while appealing to our ideals of morality and justice. And this renewed understanding is bringing peace, hope, and consolation to a growing number of individuals all around the world. The dissemination of Spiritism, therefore, is one way by which we, as human beings, are all together awakening to the realities of our spiritual existence. And we are bringing about, under heavenly guidance, a new humanity. Now, Spiritism is quite something because its principles touch on, at least it's been in my experience, nearly every aspect, if not every aspect of life, in ways that newcomers could not possibly imagine. I mean, I like to say that newcomers, people that come new to Spiritism, they just don't know what they don't know. I mean, meaning they can't imagine how much there is to discover. But even those of us who've been studying Spiritism for a good number of years, we know that there's always something new to learn. At the same time, though, Spiritism's teachings build on a set of concepts that really aren't new to humanity. So these are ones like the existence and nature of God, the immortality of the soul, and the evolution of life. What Spiritism does is it brings that together, adding some very important clarifications and even some new information, so as to form a holistic and rational body of knowledge by which we can now truly make sense of our existence. That said, a lot of people, most in fact, aren't even aware yet that Spiritism exists. A great number of people have never even heard the term before, and even more have never heard of Allan Kardec, this man who so carefully observed, studied, tested, compared so many spirit communications that he received from places around the globe, from which he eventually derived all of this information and insights that he organized and subsequently published in a set of literary works that form the foundation of Spiritist teachings. And you know, many people also have yet to become aware of the growing degree of interest, knowledge, and even ongoing research, even outside of the Spiritist arena, in areas like life after death, communication with the spiritual realm, evidence for reincarnation, the impact of compassion and positive thinking on our well-being, and even elements of our being that go beyond the purely physical aspect of our life, like our physical brain and body. Now, as you might know, there's also some confusion out there, because since the term Spiritism was first used by Allan Kardec, it has since begun to be applied as a label for things that actually have nothing to do with what we as students of Kardec believe in or the activities that we engage in. So the internet, for example, offers a plethora of sites, images, and videos that can confuse a curious person who goes online looking for information about this thing called Spiritism. And if you Google Spiritism, you would know what I mean. And so the newness, not of the most basic concepts at the heart of Spiritism, but of Spiritism itself, combined with a lack of familiarity with certain terms and awareness of what Spiritism really has to say about or in clarification of these long-lived concepts, plus this information being spread by individuals, as I mentioned, using Spiritism in ways that is not in agreement with what we believe. And I'll even throw into this mix the potential conflicts that can and do arise over what makes something a religion or not. Well, all of these factors together make it a little difficult to answer the question, what is Spiritism? Right? I mean, you Spiritists here in the room, you know what I mean. But for anyone who might be new to Spiritism, if you've ever asked this question and from the other side you've gotten a sort of constrained facial expression followed by a long pause before anything is said in response, this all might have something to do with the reason why. For the Spiritist who's asked this question, what is Spiritism? It's just so hard for us to define it in a sentence or two or three. Impossible, of course, for us to express in a short breath what Spiritism is, what it teaches, and why, where it comes from, and what it means to us. And meanwhile, by the way, as we pause to answer your question, we might already be imagining some crazy ideas that might be stirring in your mind before we get a chance to explain. And so you might find us grasping for concepts or ideas to share as if they were like magic paintbrushes that we wish could somehow paint a picture in your mind that we could never form in just a limited amount of words or time. And so this is one reason why this book was so special to me. Because finally, it gave me a chance to answer that question with a little bit more substance and structure. But just as important to me was a chance to address these erroneous preconceived notions that sometimes people come to us with about Spiritism and Spiritists. And so you'll find that I have an entire chapter in the book entitled Setting a Few Things Straight, which I've devoted almost entirely to kind of clearing the air, so to speak, right towards the beginning of the book by making some important clarifications regarding what Spiritism is not about. Now, sometimes people might ask, well, why another book like this if we already have some great books to share with people about Spiritism? And yet, you know, those of us who are Spiritists, we know that we're often asking, what is that great first book that you might give to someone to introduce them to Spiritism that might not be intimidating or that seem a little deep at first? You know, how can we share it with them in a very informal and friendly way? And so that was the goal or objective of this book. And my approach or the approach that I intended to write with was to make it very friendly, talking about spirituality in a non-preachy way, so as to just send out an invitation. And that's something I mentioned in the book, that I just want readers to think of it as my invitation to see what Spiritism is all about. And so there really is nothing in the book regarding at least Spiritism, Spiritist teachings and practices that's not already found in the other books that we have available. But writing the book gave me the chance to tell readers about all of that in my own words, and with the inclusion of some of my own personal reflections and details about my own experiences in coming to make Spiritism a part of my life. And I believe that this is important, not because my story is somehow unique, special, or in any way extraordinary, but to the contrary, because it's not so unique, and therefore it's just relatable. I think there are many people who, in one way or another, share in some aspects of their background that are similar to my own. And therefore they might have some of the same doubts that I once had, or perhaps the same inexperience with things like spirits and reincarnation. So, for example, I always questioned some topics like salvation and related ideas, in particular, for example, heaven and hell, this idea of hell and eternal suffering and punishment just really didn't sit right with me. I always questioned how we can have a loving God who deems forgiveness to be a virtue and who's teaching us to forgive one another, who would then turn around and have some sort of cutoff point where, based on just one lifetime alone, we might end up suffering eternally. And another thing was the fact that there's so many religions and philosophies around the world, and each of them tells us that they are the right one. And so I really question, how could that be? How could people be born into different places around the world where they're going to grow up learning about a different religion, possibly even without exposure to the one that is right? Again, the internet and all these ways that we access so much information is really relatively new. And I question that. And speaking of being born into different religions, we're born into a lot of different circumstances, aren't we? And so I wondered how someone could be born into wealth while others are born into poverty. Some have, a crippling situation, physically speaking, from the moment of birth, and others live a healthy life, complete physical health throughout all their years. Some are born with genes that seem to give them such a wonderful sense of intelligence or other aptitude, while others really struggle. And I think you get the idea, but these are a lot of questions that I had in my mind and that I talk about in the book, and I think that people can relate to that. So coming from these and other experiences and growing up in this country, I think that perhaps maybe I can present some of these subjects that we find in Spiritism in a format and language that might be helpful to people who are new in their introduction to Spiritism. Now, given the introductory nature of my book, I could have maybe called it, "What is Spiritism?" Though I'd not do that because we actually have a book by Allan Kardec himself with that very same title. So maybe Introduction to Spiritism or something similar. But to be honest, my intended scope in this book was to go beyond just defining Spiritism. I did want to explain what Spiritism is about, but also to demonstrate why Spiritism is different and why the perspectives that it affords us are so significant. Now, before we talk about that, to lighten things up a little bit and maybe even embarrass myself, I would like to show a picture from when I was a child dressed up one year for Halloween as none other than Casper the Friendly Ghost. And believe it or not, I actually mentioned this in the book. And my mom says that was the only way I would dress up as anything related to a ghost. And I'm not sure about you, but I think that Casper was pretty much the only friendly ghost that I had ever heard of. Something that I think has a lot to say about the typical connotation, at least in the culture, in the time and place that I grew up, regarding the idea or the term of a ghost. Something that I think closely parallels with some feelings that people have at first about the term spirit. But both spirit and ghosts, or specifically discarnate spirit, refer simply to the souls of those who were once living on earth. And yet when we hear those terms, it's most often within the context like ghosts that haunt or evil spirits that we need to ward off or some way or for some reason avoid contact with. Or perhaps we hear the term spirit as part of the beliefs of another religion or philosophy, past or present, whereby they're just dismissed as being anything more than that. So the brief mention of my little Casper costume here appears in a chapter that I entitled Spirits, Spirits Seen and Heard, but Too Seldom Mentioned, where I talk about how in the time and place that I grew up, we just never spoke or heard really about spirits, other than the context that I just mentioned. So we never heard about good spirits, angels perhaps, but never good spirits in the way that we learn about them in Spiritism. The ones who are always around us, helping, inspiring, and encouraging us throughout every day of our lives. And we certainly had no concept of being spirits ourselves or the significance of that. And I think that this maybe makes people sometimes, at least those who share in that aspect of my background, a little uneasy at first about the term spirit and Spiritism. Through Spiritism, however, we actually learn that the existence of spirits, our existence as spirits, and the communication between those of us living here on earth and those not presently living on earth or another material world, they're all very natural parts of our reality. And so to talk about the spirit is simply to talk about the soul. A lot of people are already familiar with the idea of a soul. It is simply to acknowledge that each of us is more than a random collection of material elements that somehow comes together to form this time-stamped physical body. And doesn't life make more sense that way? Are we really to believe that all of our thoughts, our ideas, emotions, the workings of our inner conscience, so unique and so personal to each one of us, are simply a creation of the physical brain? Furthermore, what would be the point of this life, of all of our joys and our struggles, of our accomplishments and our failures, if at the end of this existence all was simply lost, as if it had never existed in the first place? And why is it that in spite of the differing particulars of our religious and even non-religious beliefs, so many of us share in at least the common ground of an intuitive belief that something in us transcends the purely physical element of our being, both now and after death. Well, the discovery of the human soul's survival of physical death and ability to communicate with those still living on earth is where Spiritism began. And as you read about the history of Spiritism, and you read for yourself from the books by Allan Kardec that make up what we call the codification of Spiritism, you realize how Kardec arrived at this discovery, which he then documented with such compelling evidence and really some impressively sound logic. Already, with that finding alone, Spiritism had emerged with the capacity to console hearts and dry tears. For me personally, this confirmation had an incredible impact on me. Spiritism came to my life at a time when I was really struggling with the then recent passing of my grandfather. And at that time in my life, I really had no strong convictions about what death entailed. I really had more questions than answers about just almost anything related to God or religion and the like. And so I grieved through what I perceived personally at that time as a loss, asking myself what purpose his life had served, and really dreading the thought of potentially never seeing him again. And so you can imagine my relief when I found that the circumstances are truly different through Spiritism. Yet how many people live with this kind of anguish every day? Not to mention the fear of undergoing this thing called death themselves. To the contrary then, to know, to truly believe that life goes on, that our relationships are enduring, and that a joyful reunion is eventually in store for each and every one of us is very powerful. That's why I made it a point of setting aside a brief chapter in the book just to make the statement that, look, it's time for people to know that life and love are not lost. This is not to say that the albeit temporary separation that we experience somehow becomes easy, not by any means. But erasing the doubts about whether we will see our loved ones again, and in fact giving us ways that we can remain in contact, can go a long way in giving us the strength, the courage, and the patience to go on living as we await the day that we can be together once again. And this alone, as I kind of mentioned before, made Spiritism worth sharing. But, as I said, this discovery was only the beginning of Spiritism. And in terms of what Spiritism has to share, it's really only the tip of the iceberg. Reason alone tells us that if we exist as a spirit that survives the physical body, well, then there's got to be much more to it than that. Just cannot end there, right? In fact, a thoughtful reflection on such an idea only begs more questions. So what does that mean to be an immortal spirit? What is this spirit made of? Where does it come from? What is its function while inhabiting a physical body? What happens to the spirit at the time of death? You know, where do we go? What is life like in that state? Do those who've passed on before us still think about us and interact with us? How? If we're talking about leaving this place, we might even ask how we got here, why we're even here to begin with. why does the spirit even need to have this temporary physical body that it's just going to leave behind someday? Now we might back up even more and ask, where does all this stuff come from? So is there a creator? Is there someone or something that governs and that creates and governs life? Plus we have those questions I had mentioned before, the ones that I had myself before I came to know Spiritism. And with all of these questions, people are looking around at this world and seeing so much conflict and even suffering, and they are having some serious doubts about their faith. Sometimes people are even angry with God, but in general, there's a lot of us that are seeking answers. And so what I want you to know is that we find the answers to these and so many other questions in Spiritism. Complex in the level of details available to those who want to really dive deep into all of the mechanisms that it explains, and yet refreshingly simple in its presentation of the core concepts that govern our existence. So what I have found is that our knowledge of Spiritism, our understanding of its significance, and our ability to put its moral teachings into practice really deepens through study. Then, as Spiritists, we are so fortunate to have many wonderful resources, including a great number of wonderful books, each of which will take the reader on a journey through some particular aspect of the Spiritist view on life. So another benefit of writing this book is that I got to introduce my readers and people who are new to the kinds of books that we have available, like the books that make up the codification of Spiritism, those written by Allan Kardec, and a few of the so many others that have since become part of the Spiritist literature. And so I got to tell readers about all of the resources that we have available and how through them there are many teachings like the ones I address in the book. So in the book I do present several of the main precepts of Spiritist teachings, and then I show how they always represent the same fundamental building blocks that even the most elaborate details of Spiritism will always come back to, and how together they are the keys to understanding what happens to us and around us. For the benefit of those who are not too familiar with Spiritism, let's take a brief look at a few of them. So as Spiritists, we study about God. God being defined first and foremost as the supreme intelligence and the first cause of all things. We learn in Spiritism about a set of attributes belonging to God that help us to learn not who God is as a figure, but what God is, as we grow in our knowledge about our Creator. And as part of that, we study natural or divine laws, and in fact, the compassionate nature inherent to them. As you know, mankind is already aware of several laws that govern matter, right? We had to study some of these in school. But in Spiritism, we focus primarily on a set of moral laws that concern our relationship with God and with one another. And in our study of those moral laws, as we learn to recognize our imperfections and work to overcome them and to develop some virtues that we aspire to attain in seeking our inner transformation in pursuit of true happiness, then we as Spiritists, we turn to Jesus as our model and guide. Now, the study of these moral laws is really important, and it is connected with something that is so key to the Spiritist knowledge, which is the accountability for our actions. We are here in pursuit of happiness, but we have to earn that happiness through the choices that we make, our decisions, our thoughts, and our behaviors. And so true happiness is something that each and every one of us will one day have. But just as there's no such thing as eternal punishment, there's also no eternal happiness without the work that we have to do to attain it. And we have to learn how to love, which has everything to do with the way that we relate to one another and even to our own selves. So we hear a lot of these concepts nowadays like consciousness and oneness and the fact that we're all connected, all of which is very important and true. But we need some principles or some basic ideas that help us to really make sense of that. So what Spiritism does is it takes this spirituality and makes it palpable, tangible. It makes it practical for us in our daily lives. Now, for that, we need to have an understanding of our nature as immortal spirits. And so we study about spirits created by God, the makeup of the spirit body, and how they interact with the physical body, and details about the spirit's existence outside of the physical body in what we call the spiritual realm of life. Which brings me to the next point, life after life. And this means that we learn all about life in the spiritual realm. Now I need to pause here to comment that because the information that we have in Spiritism is gathered precisely from our brothers and sisters in the spiritual realm, we have in Spiritism a rather uniquely enlightening vision of the afterlife. And so, I mean, it's not just that we continue to exist after physical death, but that we truly go on living, acting, and interacting in ways that, to me, were eye-opening. And so when I was writing this book and I was talking to my husband about one of the related chapters, he kind of joked with me about the wow part of the title and asked me, are you really going to call it that? Life after death in the spirit world? Wow. And I said, yes, I am. I have to, because it is so fascinating. It is so different from what most people, at least that I know, were even aware of, that I wanted to express how I felt when I first started to learn about it. And I'll be honest with you that as I continue to read more Spiritist books, it's still not uncommon, really, for a wow to cross my mind or my lips now and then. And before that, as you know, as Spiritists, we study about the communication between incarnate and discarnate spirits. And in fact, in Spiritism, we find extensive details about this. But as you'll find in my book, Spiritism has a rather unique perspective on the application of mediumship. So first of all, in terms of employing it safely, in an educated manner. What does that mean? Well, it means that aside from learning what mediumship is and how it works, we also learn how to evaluate the messages that are received so that we can determine what kinds of spirits are communicating to us and the degree of credibility that we may or may not apply to those communications and to even the names that sometimes come attached to them. We also learn about the behaviors that are required in order to attract and maintain the communication, the collaboration, and the work of good spirits. You know, our spiritual benefactors who we want to work alongside us, or better, who we want to work alongside. And second of all, in Spiritism, mediumship is used only for noble purposes. Okay, so we don't practice fortune telling or ask the spirits to predict the future. We don't practice voodoo or anything crazy like that. We don't charge for any mediumship related services. Mediumship is only used in Spiritism to help. It is for enlightenment, education, and consolation. And it's used to assist both incarnate spirits, those of us living here in this world, and the discarnate spirits, those who've passed on. Now, last but absolutely not least, I actually saved the best for last, we study about reincarnation and evolution spanning two realms of life. And I know I've spoken a lot here this evening mainly about the immortal spirit and its existence independent of the physical body, because I think that that is an important starting point for people who are new. But what I want you to know now is that this point of reincarnation and evolution in two worlds is where the principles and teachings of Spiritism all come together to reveal the profound meaning of life. And that is what this book is really here to explain. So we come to discover in Spiritism that as human spirits, we are undergoing a process of transformation. We are on a path of evolution by which over time and many lifetimes, we develop both our minds and our hearts. Our immortal life is a school full of diverse lessons. So destined for true and lasting happiness, we gradually progress toward that ultimate goal. But this takes place over the course of time, centuries, even millennia. And through reincarnation, this evolutionary journey takes us through countless migrations back and forth between life in the spiritual and the material worlds, in both of which we will continue to learn and grow. Now, this does not take place only at an individual level, because we are also progressing as a collective community of human spirits, whereby together we will bring about the evolution not only of ourselves but of this very world, where one day faith, compassion, solidarity, and love will be the cornerstone of this new humanity. But then what does that mean for us right here and right now? Well, the understanding of reincarnation, evolution, and the compassion of divine justice transports us. It kind of lifts us to this elevated viewpoint, wherein seeing the connection between past, present, and future, seeing all these events of our immortal lives and how they are on this continuum, gives us a vision by which now we can make sense of events in ways that we really couldn't understand otherwise. So with all of the clarifications and wisdom that Spiritism affords, we now begin to understand why we can say that nothing happens without reason, that all of our experiences represent lessons and opportunities which ultimately facilitate our spiritual progress. We learn that our relationships are not coincidental encounters, and they are more important than we had ever imagined. We learn that every dream that we will have the opportunity to live even if not in this particular lifetime. That there's no such thing as eternal punishment, suffering, or damnation, and that every mistake is redeemable. We learn that our suffering, in fact, has a purpose, but it also has an end. And even though that end is in our own hands, the spiritual realm is always here to help us. And guess what? We're also here to help one another. So that while pride and selfishness are our greatest obstacles to progress, humility and compassion then are our keys to salvation. And by the choices that we make, the actions that we take, we are sowing the seeds for what our tomorrow will bring, whether in this life or beyond. Now, consoled and inspired by this perspective that one can find by studying Spiritism, we become motivated and empowered to put its teachings into practice, finding a new source of inner peace while laying the foundation for a greater happiness to come. And this is how Spiritism is changing lives for the better. Spiritism is one, but not the only path to God, because truly the only real path to God is love. And so life is about learning what it truly means to love and to be loved. But when we struggle along the way and we find ourselves asking the hows and the whys of our existence, then we may repeatedly stumble over doubts that cloud our vision and that shake our faith. That is, until we find an unfailing source of light to illuminate our path, one that clears away this fog of mystery and uncertainties, so as to comfort us in our sorrows, to inspire within us a renewed sense of hope, to give us a glimpse of what it might be like to see ourselves and one another through God's compassionate eyes, and to encourage within us the will to take charge of our own destiny. In my experience, I have found Spiritism to be a source of such light. And this is why I have wanted to share it with others, in the hopes that they too may benefit from it as I have. And so for anyone who may be new to Spiritism, this book is simply my invitation to you to explore all of these possibilities. And for those already familiar with the treasures of knowledge found in Spiritism, I offer you this book as a resource with which to share its blessings. Thank you so much, and God bless.